Dear learners, welcome you all for this module on national policies, programs, and Act for Inclusive Education. As you have already gone through the basic concept and importance of inclusive education, here we shall try to discuss the policies and acts behind the implementation of inclusive education, particularly in the context of India. So, welcome you all for this module on policy perspectives on inclusive education. As we know, education is basically concerned with human resource development by enhancing knowledge and skills of the people in a society. In order to make a country developed, there is an urgent need to make people functionally literate and economically efficient and then to bring them out as a productive citizens of a country. In this context, education plays a vital role in bringing multifaceted human resource development. Therefore, for making education as accessible as possible to all various educational avenues are being created. Besides, a developing country like India, which has a rich demographic dividend, needs the proper form of skill-based education or quality education. So, the education is a prerequisite for the acquisition of knowledge, enhancement of skills, and development of attitudes and values. As human beings, we need education because it provides us with knowledge and skills to lead a meaningful life in a society. During the British period, education was made available to some selected people who were engaged in service of the colonial rule. Their main aim was to ensure smooth administration and business profit by giving education to some selected Indians. But after independence, India being a democratic country, a good deal of attention and importance was given to all form of education for promoting the welfare of the citizens of the country. There has been a realization of the urgent need to make education as accessible as possible to all the citizens of the country for their inclusive growth and development. Keeping this importance and value education in mind, the government of India has made education as a fundamental right and it has become a birthright for everyone living in the country. So, in this module or unit, we shall discuss the various policies and programs that have been implemented for providing inclusive education to all in India, particularly after independence. Now, if we look at why the policies, programs, and the act are important behind inclusive education, keeping the importance in mind regarding the inclusive education, the government of India has made education a fundamental right and thus it has become a birthright for everyone living in the country, as we have already stated. In a democratic country like India, we have access to human rights guaranteed by the Constitution. Elementary education is a ladder on the basis of which learners are able to attain secondary and higher education. Secondary and higher education are the platforms where knowledge and information are disseminated to the learners for developing their functional skills and to make them efficient for their future living. Therefore, various policies and schemes have been implemented for improving and reforming our education system from elementary to higher education, particularly after independence. After independence, as we know, it was Kothari Education Commission or Kothari Education Commission who had recommended the national system of education in 1964-66, followed by the new education policy, the national education policy of 1986 and revised education policy in 1992 and later on in 2020. In 2016, the National Education Policy emphasized the prevalence of an inclusive society. The higher education system in India, which is the second or third largest in the world, needs to be revamped to match the changing learning environment of the 21st century. Aiming these senses, the National Education Policy 2020, which was proposed or implemented by Ministry of Education, Government of India, is assumed to sense the educational landscape through path-breaking reforms. The National Education Policy is expected to bring excellence in the teaching learning process and research. The National Education Policy 2020, which is a holistic and a comprehensive approach towards the Indian education system, could be considered a milestone of initiating a modern education system in India. So, here we are going to discuss the suggestion and recommendation of National Education Policy 1986, National Education Policy 2020, and other state legislation or national legislations in a composite way. The National Education Policy, which have been implemented from time to time, envisions a credible education system capable of ensuring inclusive quality education and lifelong learning opportunities for all, and producing students or graduates equipped with the knowledge, skills, attitudes, and values that are required to lead a productive life, participate in the country's development process, respond to the requirements of the fast-changing, ever-globalizing knowledge-based societies, and developing responsible citizens who respect the Indian traditions of acceptance of diversity with regard to India's heritage, culture, and history, thereby promoting social cohesion and religious amity. This vision recognizes the central role of education in India's social, economic, political, and cultural development. Mahatma Gandhi said, the real difficulty is that people have no idea of what education truly is. We assess the value of education in the same manner as we assess the value of land or of shares in the stock exchange market. We want to provide only such education as would enable the students to earn more. We hardly give any thought to the improvement of the character of the educated. Inspired by the thoughts of the father of the nation, the policy brings into focus the role of education in inculcating values, providing skills and competencies to citizens, enabling them to contribute to the nation's well-being. It recognizes that long-term economic growth and development of the nation critically depend upon the quality of the products of the education system, and that an education system built on the premises of quality and equity is central to sustainable development and to achieving success in the emerging knowledge economy and society. The policy recognizes education as the most potential tool for the socio-economic mobility and a key instrument for building an equitable, just, and human society. It also recognizes education as an integrative force in society and its role in imparting values that foster social cohesion and national identity. The vision also implies that good quality education will help amalgamate globalization with localization, enabling India's children and youth to become global citizens and with their roots deeply embedded in Indian culture and traditions. Thus, it may be stated that the National Education Policy 2016-2020 provides a framework for the development of education in India over the coming few years. The basic focus of the NEP in the 1986 and 2020 envisions a credible and high-performing education system capable of ensuring inclusive quality education and lifelong learning opportunities for all and ensuring equitable, inclusive and quality education for all, that is children, youths and the adults, and to promote the realization of the nation's human potential to its fullest with equity and excellence. Besides, these policies, legislations, and programs are being implemented to foster quality and inclusive education with a strong focus on reforms relating to curricular, learning materials, pedagogic process, learning assessment, teacher quality and performance, and institutional leadership and management, with a view to enabling all students at all levels of education to attain the specific learning outcomes regarding knowledge, skills, attitudes, and values that are required to lead a productive life, participate in the country's development process, and respond to the emerging global challenges. Thus, the policy strives to promote inclusive education for all as inclusive. Education is a transformative approach aimed at ensuring all children, regardless of their abilities, backgrounds, or identities, have equal access to quality education. It seeks to eliminate barriers that exclude certain groups and fosters an equitable learning environment. In India, inclusive education has been shaped by a combination of national policies, programs, and legislations that address the diverse needs of learners, particularly those from marginalized and disadvantaged communities. So, hope you have cleared about why the policies are important for ensuring an inclusive education. Here we shall try to discuss particularly the NEP 1986, and it's related to how it's recommended for ensuring inclusive education in detail. In 1968, when the national policy on education was formulated for improving the educational scenario in our country, there it was envisaged that it would be followed by a 5-yearly review to progress and working out of new policies and programs. Regarding this statement, at the time of formulation of every new 5-year plan, a review has been made to assess the drawbacks or shortcomings as well as the achievements of education, and finally to decide on some plans or programs for the upcoming 5 years. It is through making their policy and programs that every country seeks to develop its system of education to express and promote its unique social cultural identity, and also to meet the challenges of the times. The National Policy of Education of 1986 is the result of the reviews which was discussed and adopted during the budget session of 1985 when Rajiv Gandhi was the Prime Minister of India. Again, a committee was set up under the chairmanship of Asra Ramamurthy in May 1990 to review the National Policy of Education and to recommendation for its modification. The Central Advisory Board of Education, a committee set up in July 1991 under the chairmanship of Sri N. Janardhan Reddy, Chief Minister of Andhra Pradesh, considered some modification in NEP taking into consideration the report of Ramamurthy Committee and other relevant development having a bearing on the policy. The committee submitted its report in January 1992, which is known as National Programme of Action of 1992. The policy aimed to promote national progress, a sense of common citizenship and the culture, and to strengthen national integration. The Central Advisory Board of Education, in its meeting held on 8 and 9 March 1991, decided to constitute a committee to consider the recommendation of National Policy on Education Review Committee. The committee was appointed on 31st July 1991 under the chairmanship of Sri Janardhan Reddy, who was the Chief Minister of Andhra Pradesh that time. The main objectives of the committee were to review the implementation of various parameters of NEP 1986, taking into consideration the relevant development since the policy was formulated. The committee submitted its report in January 1992. The Central Advisory Board of Education considered the Janardhan Reddy Committee report in May 1992 and finalized the revised national policy on education. The National Education Policy of 1986 marked a significant step towards equitable education by emphasizing inclusivity. Recognizing education as a tool for social justice, it laid the foundation for addressing disparities in access and quality of education. If we look at the vision of NEP 1986 on inclusive education, particularly the NEP 1986 aimed to ensure that education became a means to achieve social justice and equality and national integration. The policy acknowledged that certain groups, including scheduled castes, that is SCs, scheduled tribes, that is STs, women and children with disabilities, face systematic barriers to education. It emphasized the need to bridge the gap in access, participation, and learning outcomes for marginalized communities. Secondly, it tries to integrate special needs education within mainstream schooling system. It also recommended to create equitable opportunities for all learners irrespective of their socio-economic background or abilities. The policy guiding principle was to provide equal access to education while addressing the diverse needs of India's population. If you look at the key provision of NEP 1986 for inclusive education, it basically focus on equity and access. The policy highlighted the disparities in educational opportunities across gender, caste, and region. To address this, NEP 1986 proposed special emphasis on the education of girls and women to bridge gender gap. It also proposed to targeted interventions for SCs and STs, including reserved seats and scholarship. It also proposed to expansion of education infrastructure in rural and remote areas to improve accessibility. The NEP 1986 also tries to integrate children with disabilities. It recognizes the needs to bring children with disabilities into the mainstream educational system, and it tries to develop recommended some key focus area on promoting the integration of children with disabilities into the regular school, encouraging the development of specialized resources such as trained teachers and adapted teaching materials, establishing special schools as a traditional step to mainstream inclusion. To address the needs of children outside the formal schooling system, the NEP 1986 this policy also promoted and also supported the non-formal education system. These included flexible learning programs for working children and those from marginalized communities, and community-based initiatives to provide basic education to children in rural and urban slums. The 1986 policy also emphasized the vocational training as a means of empowering socio-economically disadvantaged groups. By linking education to employment, this policy aimed to enhance the employability of marginalized youth and provide skill-based opportunities for children with disabilities. Particularly on the aspect of research training and development, the 1986 policy called for comprehensive research training program to sensitize educators to diverse learning needs, development of specialized courses for teaching children with disabilities, emphasize on continuous professional development to enhance the capabilities of teachers in inclusive classroom. How the policies were implemented and what were the impact of NEP 1986, then we can see the policy's vision led to the initiation of several national programs aimed at promoting inclusive education. For example, the Operation Blackboard, which was implemented in 1986, aimed at improving the quality of primary schools by providing essential infrastructure and teaching aids. District Primary Education Program, it focused on increasing enrollment enrollment and reducing dropouts rate among this disadvantaged group. Mohila Samak program, in which was implemented in 1986, it's promoted education for women and girls in rural areas, emphasizing empowerment and equality. Some programs were implemented for advancing inclusion for marginalized groups by addressing the disparities in education, and some significant steps were made, such as increased enrollment rates for ST/SC students and girls, enhanced participation of children with disabilities in mainstream school, improve access to education in rural and remote areas through non-formal learning centers. If we look at the challenges and gaps of NEP 1986, it has the policy faced several challenges, such as inadequate implementation of policies due to the resource constraint, persistent sociocultural barriers that limited access for marginalized groups, insufficient training and support for teachers to handle inclusive classroom effectively. The NEP 1986 served as a foundational framework for subsequent education reforms. It paved the way for the Right to Education Act, which was implemented in 2009, which made education a fundamental right for children aged from 6 to 14 years. National programs like Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, Rashtriya Madhyamik Shiksha Abhiyan, which emphasize inclusion and equity, and progressive policies under the National Education Policy 2020, which further expanded the scope of inclusive education. So the National Education Policy of 1986 was a pioneering effort in advancing inclusive education in India. By focusing on equity, access, and quality, it addresses the diverse needs of learners and laid the foundation for a more inclusive education system. While challenges remain, the vision of NEP 1986 continues to inspire efforts to ensure that education becomes a tool for empowerment and social justice for all. So, after NEP, if we look at how the UNESCO has emphasized for promoting inclusive education, particularly in the context of India, the UNESCO statement in 1994 significantly influenced India's inclusive education policies. It emphasized the importance of schools accommodating all children, regardless of their physical, intellectual, social, emotional, linguistic, and other conditions. Besides, UNESCO also tries to promote inclusive education as a part of the global education agenda under the Sustainable Development Goal, that is SDG 4. If we look at UNESCO commitment to inclusive education, then it seems the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, that is UNESCO, plays a vital role in promoting inclusive education worldwide. As a leading global agency in education, UNESCO advocates for policies, programs, and initiatives that ensure equitable access to learning opportunities for all individuals, particularly the marginalized and the vulnerable groups. What are the key principles of inclusive education according to UNESCO? It basically emphasizes on equity and accessibility. Education should be available to all individuals without discrimination based on gender, disability, ethnicity, socioeconomic background, or geographical location. It also emphasizes to provide quality education for all, ensuring that education content and pedagogy meet diverse learning needs while maintaining high standard. UNESCO emphasized to eliminate the barriers to access education because addressing systematic issues such as poverty, discrimination, inadequate infrastructure, and rigid curricula that prevent full participation in education. So UNESCO addresses this issue that can be eliminated to access education as a barriers. And again, one of the most important envision are the recommendation of UNESCO to provide a learner-centered approach in education system. By adapting teaching methods and resources to accommodate different learning styles and abilities. It also required to involve the community involvement in education by encouraging families, teachers, and policymakers to collaborate in creating inclusive education system. If we look at the UNESCO Global Framework and Policies on Inclusive Education in the context of Education 2030 Agenda and Sustainable Development Goal, that is SDG 4, then UNESCO leads the implementation SDG 4, which aims to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. It emphasizes inclusivity in early childhood education, primary and secondary education, and technical and vocational training. The Solomon Statement in 1994, which is a landmark declaration reaffirming the rights of every child, particularly those with disabilities, to be included in mainstream education. It advocates the development of inclusive schools that cater to all learners. The Global Education Monitoring Report, which is published by the UNESCO, is an annual publication that assesses the progress of countries towards achieving SDG 4, highlighting the challenges and best practices in terms of implementation of inclusive education. Another document is also very important, that UNESCO Policy Guidelines on Inclusive Education in 2009. That policy provides a framework for government to integrate inclusive policies into their national education system. So the key areas of focus in inclusive education of UNESCO, it emphasizes on education for children with disabilities, as UNESCO, we know, supports assistive technologies, teacher training, and curricular adaptation to integrate children with disabilities into mainstream classroom. Gender inclusive education, and the UNESCO promote the gender inclusive education by advocating for the elimination of gender disparities in education with initiatives like Gender Equity in Education campaign. The key focus of UNESCO is education for refugees and displaced population, providing access to education for refugees, migrants, and internally displaced children through the various global education coalition programs. Multilingual and culturally responsive education, encouraging education in local languages and culturally relevant curricular in support minority and indigenous learners are some of the key focus areas of the UNESCO. Challenges to inclusive education, and how the UNESCO provided some solutions regarding the lack of infrastructure. UNESCO promotes funding for school accessibility and technological support. Regarding the challenges like teacher training gap, in this context, UNESCO tries to develop the teachers training modules on inclusive teaching strategies. Regarding the social stigma and discrimination, the UNESCO tries to provide or aware some campaign and policy advocacy for equal rights in education. Regarding limited policy implementation, the UNESCO provided solution like capacity building programs to help government implement inclusive education policies effectively. So UNESCO commitment to inclusive education ensures that all learners, irrespective of their circumstances, receive equitable opportunities to learn and thrive. By fostering inclusive policies, capacity building programs, and international collaboration, UNESCO continues to lead global movement towards a more concrete, just, and accessible education system to all. So thank you for listening this video, and in the next module we shall discuss how the national legislations were implemented for ensuring inclusive education in detail.